The war was over, though the silence afterward was far more haunting than the thunder of cannons had ever been. Ordanes, jewel of the Lutheran Empire, once glittered like a crown set upon the brow of the stars. Its oceans shimmered in turquoise. Vastness, its spires of crystal and gold had reached for the heavens as though they were born to command them. For centuries the planet had been a seat of royalty, a beacon of wealth and dominion. Now it lay broken, blackened, stripped of its arrogance. The bombardment had ceased 3 days past, yet the world still smoldered. Vast cities lay in heaps of glass and molten stone. Towers that had stood for millennia were split down the middle like rotten timber. Their regal arches collapsed into the dust. The air tasted of iron and fire. Survivors moved like shadows among the wreckage, their robes of silk and velvet turned to rags by soot. Above this wounded world, the black ship hung in solemn vigil. Its silhouette was terrible, its armor swallowing starlight like a void given shape. Where the alien fleets had fled or been shattered, the black ship endured, vast and quiet, a judge that neither forgot nor forgave. And within its hold, bound, in chains of unadorned iron, was the Prince of Ordanes. He had not been slain in the fall of his capital, though many of his captors had urged it. He was the son of the Emperor himself, the favored heir, blood of the throne, living symbol of the Empire's divine right. To kill him would have been simple. To keep him alive was a greater defiance. For humanity had declared, with a voice, heard across every star, he would stand trial. The galaxy could scarcely believe it. To put a prince, a sovereign by blood, before the common scales of justice? To strip away the sanctity of his birth and weigh him as though he were a farmer, a soldier, a thief? It was unthinkable. Among the empires of old, kings were beyond judgment. They judged, but were never judged. And yet, here humanity stood. Their fleets ringed the fallen world, their soldiers marched through the ashes, and their captains spoke a language that unsettled all who heard it. It was not the tongue of conquest nor of tribute, but of reckoning. The prince had been taken in the burning ruins of his own palace. He had fought, though poorly. His ceremonial blade was no match for the relentless precision of human infantry. They had found him amid the bodies of his honor guard, his robe torn, his crown lost somewhere in the rubble. He had shouted oaths of vengeance, names of ancestors, titles that stretched back 1,000 years. None of it mattered. He was dragged from the wreckage as a prisoner, and the galaxy trembled. From distant courts, emissaries now clamored for his release. The high houses of the Lutheran Empire declared that this was an abomination against all order. The priests whispered of sacrilege. Even neutral powers, those who had suffered quietly beneath imperial boot heels, feared what this meant. If humanity could judge a prince, what ruler was safe, what throne secure? Yet among the scattered and the broken, among those whose homes had been ash and whose children had been taken in chains, there was something else, a quiet, rising hope. For they remembered the emperor's decrees, the conscriptions, the taxes that bled worlds dry. They remembered the weight of crowns pressing on their necks, though they themselves owned no gold. They remembered the screams of those left to die so that a royal might extend their dynasty by one more gilded century. And now, for the first time, they saw royalty in chains. The black ship prepared its course, not back to Earth, as many had expected, but to the tribunal, a place humanity was building not in secrecy but in the open light of stars. A hall of judgment not gilded in gold but carved from stone and steel. No thrones, no crowns, only laws, cold and unflinching. The prince sat in his cell, his eyes burning with pride that had not yet learned to bow. He muttered promises of vengeance, though the walls did not answer him. He whispered prayers to ancestors who would not come. In his heart, he still believed himself untouchable. For was he not born of the blood that commanded worlds? Was not his father worshipped as divine? Did not crowns bend the very fabric of destiny? But outside his cell, humanity moved differently. They bowed to no king and prayed to no bloodline. They were not awed by the weight of his name. To them he was not royalty, He was simply a man, one who had ordered wars, one who had enslaved colonies, one who had left ash where once there had been light. The tribunal awaited. As the black ship turned from the burning horizon of Ordonis, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Some whispered that humanity had gone mad. Others feared they had glimpsed something greater, that the humans were building not an empire, but a fire that could consume empires themselves. The ruins of Ordonis glowed faintly in the dark, a crown of fire resting upon a world of ash. The prince's gaze lingered on it as the stars swallowed his home. He thought of vengeance. But in the quiet corridors of the black ship, where iron footsteps echoed and the hum of engines filled the silence, the air itself seemed to whisper, a truth more terrible than any vengeance. There would be no ransom, no tribute, no escape. For the first time in galactic history, a king's blood would be weighed like any other man's, and humanity, relentless and unbowed, would be the ones to do it. The black ship was not the largest vessel in the human fleet, nor the most heavily armed. Yet among the stars it was the most feared. Other ships inspired caution. The black ship inspired silence. Its hull was dark beyond comparison, built not to reflect light but to drink it whole. Where alien warships bristled with banners and insignias of dynasties, this ship bore no crest, no symbol of allegiance to a crown. It carried only its name, whispered in dread across the galaxy, Justicar. It was from this vessel that humanity had declared their intent. Not conquest, not ransom, but judgment. The galaxy had never seen such defiance. For ages untold, rulers had been sacred. Even when wars consumed planets and emperors fell, their bloodlines remained untouched, preserved like fragile relics. Princes and princesses were never captives, they were bargaining chips, treaties embodied in flesh. They were returned for ransoms of gold and planets. They were exchanged like sacred coin. But humanity rejected this order as though it were a lie told too many times. The Justicar carried the prince not as treasure, but as prisoner. His cell was iron, unadorned, its walls bare. His food was plain, served without ceremony. No bow was given when guards entered. They spoke to him not with reverence, but with the same clipped precision they would use with any other accused. It was humiliation, and yet more than that. It was revelation. For across the stars, messages had already spread. The humans had captured the son of the emperor and treated him not as heir to eternity, but as criminal under trial. And the galaxy did not know how to respond. On the Justicar's bridge, Captain Ilara Vey stood like a blade unsheathed. She had commanded fleets before, though none bore the weight of this mission. Her uniform was plain, her face scarred from battles waged on worlds that no alien noble could name. To her crew she was a leader, to her enemies she was a specter, and to the galaxy at large she was fast becoming something else, the herald of a new law. Reports flickered across her consoles. Outrage poured from the Lutheran court. Alien nobles demanded the prince's release. The emperor himself, though not yet moved to speak publicly, had dispatched envoys who carried the full weight of imperial fury. Armies were gathering, though. They hesitated at the shadow of Earth's fleets, but Captain Vey did not flinch. She did not answer their threats with apologies, nor their bribes with silence. To every demand, her reply was the same. He will stand trial, as all men must. Her words became fire. Some races condemned her arrogance, others whispered her defiance in awe. On worlds where peasants bent beneath crowns, where slaves tilled soil for dynasties that had forgotten their names, her words spread like forbidden scripture. The crew of the Justicar felt the tension like a storm pressing upon their hull. They were soldiers, engineers, medics, ordinary humans bound together by extraordinary purpose. Many of them had lost kin to the Lutheran wars. Some had fought in the ash-choked trenches of conquered colonies, where the prince's decrees had condemned thousands to chains. For them, guarding him was not duty alone. It was justice taking its first breath. And yet, even among them, unease coiled. For what if the galaxy refused to accept this? What if humanity's act of defiance drew every empire's wrath? The Justicar might become not a symbol of justice, but the spark that set the stars ablaze. Captain Vey knew this well. In the still hours of night, when the hum of the ship seemed to echo louder than breath, she walked the corridors alone. She passed by the cell where the prince sat. His eyes followed her, burning with hatred and disbelief. He spoke often, though she never answered. "You cannot do this," he hissed once. "I am heir to the eternal crown. My father will come for me. The galaxy itself will rise against you." But she looked upon him with the same calm she gave to the void. "A crown is no shield against judgment," she answered at last. "And the galaxy is watching." The prince had no answer to that. The Justicar charted its course not toward Earth, but toward the Tribunal, a station newly built upon a barren moon chosen for its neutrality. It was a place not of grandeur but of iron, its halls constructed with deliberate simplicity. Humanity wanted no spectacle of gold and silk. They wanted a courtroom of stone, steel, and truth. The galaxy watched as the Justicar sailed. Fleets shadowed it from afar, some with blades drawn, others with curiosity sharpened. Emissaries came and went, each leaving with frustration etched upon their faces, and through it all, humanity held its course. For the first time in history, a trial was coming that would not bow to bloodlines. A prince would be weighed not as heir, but as man. And aboard the black ship, Captain Vey felt the weight of destiny pressing down upon her. She did not see herself as conqueror or savior. She was simply the vessel of something larger, the idea that justice could burn brighter than crowns, fiercer than thrones. The Justicar cut across the stars like a blade, through silk, and with every passing day, the galaxy's unease grew heavier. Whispers spread among common folk, among slaves, among soldiers who had long carried swords for crowns that had never seen their faces. Perhaps the humans were mad, or perhaps they were showing the universe something it had always feared, that even kings could be judged. The galaxy had always been a place of hierarchy. From the smallest moon kingdom to the mightiest star empires, order had been drawn in crowns and thrones, in bloodlines and banners. To challenge that order was to invite chaos. And chaos, all rulers knew, was the only thing that could truly unmake an empire. Yet the humans had done exactly that. The capture of the Lutheran prince sent tremors across every sector, and the tremors grew into waves that could not be silenced. Courtiers gasped behind jeweled masks. Emperors whispered to each other in vaulted halls, their voices strained with fury and disbelief. The priest declared an abomination, the son of eternity dragged before mortals. The nobility swore oaths of vengeance, but far from the glittering palaces in the smoke-choked slums and half-forgotten colonies, a different murmur began to rise. It was not outrage, it was hope. For the first time, peasants on mining worlds spoke of justice not as a dream, but as a thing glimpsed. Slaves in the harvest pits whispered that perhaps even the untouchable could be touched. Soldiers conscripted into wars they did not choose began to imagine a world where princes did not decree their deaths with a wave of the hand. And in the courts of power, rulers saw this and shivered. The Empress of Luthara, mother to the captured prince, received endless delegations. Some urged swift war, others careful diplomacy. A few counseled patience, whispering that the humans could not possibly hold their course against the fury of 1,000 thrones. But the Empress knew her people. She knew the galaxy. And in the privacy of her chambers, she admitted a truth that no one dared voice aloud. The humans had changed the story. Once, it had always been crowns against crowns, fleets against fleets, dynasties struggling in endless cycles of conquest and collapse. But humanity had made a new declaration. They had said, "There are no crowns in the eyes of justice." And that truth, if it spread, could unmake everything. So the Empress summoned her most loyal admirals. Fleets were marshaled not only to threaten Earth, but to shadow the black ship itself. Wherever the Justicar sailed, imperial ships followed like vultures circling prey. Yet they did not strike. Not yet. For to kill the humans now would be to confirm their words. that rulers feared justice. Instead, the empire plotted to pressure them, to suffocate them with politics, to isolate them until they bent beneath the weight of tradition. The Justicar sailed through this storm with steady silence. Captain Ilara Vey received envoy after envoy. They offered gold, planets, even alliances. Some threatened annihilation. None were given more than a single answer. The trial will proceed. And with each refusal, the storm grew. Neutral powers convened emergency councils. Some debated joining the Lutherans, fearing humanity's precedent. Others, weary of imperial arrogance, wondered if this was the moment they had waited for. Could justice, once unleashed, be wielded by all? Or was it a fire too dangerous to spread? The tribunal itself became a focal point of galactic attention. The station was not magnificent. Its walls were steel, its halls bare, built with ruthless utility. Yet as news spread, delegations requested passage there, desperate to witness the unthinkable. Some came to protest, others to observe, and a few, quiet and unannounced, to cheer for the humans in their hearts. In the midst of this storm, the prince remained unbowed. Shackled, yes, confined to a cell stripped of dignity, but his spirit burned with fury. To him, this was insult beyond measure. His voice carried the conviction of centuries, of dynasties that had never known chains. "You cannot judge me," he told his guards. "You cannot place eternity in a dock of iron." But the guards did not answer. They listened with silence, and silence was sharper than any blade. Each day brought the Justicar closer to the tribunal. Each day the galaxy grew louder with its arguments and its fears, and yet the humans did not falter. They had charted a course that no other species had dared, and to deviate now would be to betray not only themselves, but every whisper of hope that had taken root among the oppressed. The gathering storm became not merely a question of one prince's fate. It became a question of whether the galaxy itself would continue to bow to crowns, or whether crowns would burn in the fire of justice. And as the tribunal's gray moon came into view, the storm reached its peak. On distant worlds, peasants lit candles in secret. Nobles sharpened daggers in shadow. Priests filled their temples with incense, praying that the divine order would be restored. But aboard the black ship there was no prayer, no incense, no dagger. There was only purpose, sharp and unyielding as the hull itself. Humanity had called the galaxy to witness. Now, the moment of judgment drew near. It was not a palace, nor a hall gilded in jewels. It was stone and steel, cut into the bones of a barren moon whose soil had never known kings. It rose stark and unadorned, a fortress not of power but of judgment. Where other courts were built to dazzle the eye and awe the petitioner into silence, this one was built to strip away illusion, until only truth remained. The Justicar arrived beneath a pall of watchful eyes. Fleets encircled the moon in tense orbits, their hulls flashing with the heraldry of dynasties that had reigned for centuries. They did not fire, though many wished to. Instead, they waited, chained by a mix of fear, outrage, and grim fascination. When the human warship descended, silence gripped the stars. Inside the tribunal, preparations were already complete. The chamber was vast but plain, its ceiling high and its walls unadorned. Benches lined the sides, not carved for elegance but for endurance, meant to hold the weight of many witnesses. At its center was a simple raised platform, not a throne, but a dock. Chains hung from its sides. There would be no crown here, no bowing, no divine right. Here, there would be only law. The first to arrive were the envoys. Alien nobility stepped cautiously into the chamber, their silken robes trailing across the cold floor, their jeweled hands clutched tightly around scepters of authority that meant little in this place. They expected grandeur. They found austerity. They expected to be greeted as sovereigns. They were met as mere observers. Whispers filled the air. Some muttered in disbelief that a royal son could truly be made to stand here. Others shuddered at the audacity of humanity, daring to place blood of the crown on trial. Yet a few, those who carried scars of empire's cruelty, looked upon the chamber and felt their throats tighten with something they scarcely recognized. Hope. Then came the humans. Their uniforms were plain, their boots echoing sharply against the stone. They moved with quiet precision, neither deferential nor boastful. They carried no banners, no crowns, no symbols of dynasties. They carried only the weight of purpose. And behind them, shackled in iron, came the prince. A hush fell as he entered. The galaxy had never seen such a sight. Once, he would have walked with a retinue of slaves and soldiers, cloaked in velvet, crowned in gold, his every step a sermon of power. Now his wrists bore chains, his robes were plain gray, his crown long lost in the rubble of his palace. His back was still straight, his eyes still proud, but the silence that greeted him was not reverence, it was judgment. He looked upon the chamber and sneered. To him it was an insult carved in stone, a denial of everything his bloodline had commanded for 1,000 years. He raised his chin, seeking familiar deference in the faces of the envoys, but he found none. Not here. The prince was led to the dock, the chains were fastened, and for the first time in galactic memory, a royal heir stood not above judgment but within it. Captain Alara Vey entered last. Her presence was not announced with fanfare. She did not wear robes of command or carry a scepter of office. Yet when she walked to the center of the chamber, the air shifted. Her scarred face, her steady stride, her plain black uniform, these were the marks not of nobility, but of a soldier who had bled for her people. And when she spoke, the chamber listened. "This tribunal is convened," she declared, her voice echoing against the stone. "Here stands the accused, Prince Kalen of the Lutheran Empire. He is charged with crimes of war, of enslavement, of genocide. He is charged not as prince, nor as heir, nor as son of an emperor. He is charged as a man." Gasps rippled through the chamber. To strip away his title so publicly was an act of sacrilege, yet the humans did not waver. "This trial will not be judged by crowns," Alara continued, her eyes sweeping across the gathered envoys. "It will not be swayed by lineage or by wealth. Here all men stand equal before the law, and if a prince may not be judged, then no one may." The words struck like hammer blows. Some nobles rose to protest, their voices shrill with outrage. They demanded recognition of the prince's divine right, the sanctity of his blood. But their cries faltered beneath the cold stare of the tribunal. Here their crowns were worth nothing, and in that silence something profound shifted. The peasants watching from hidden galleries, the slaves who had begged for seats at the margins, the widows of conquered colonies who had traveled across the stars to see this day, they felt it first. For the first time in their lives, they saw the untouchable touched, the unbreakable broken. They saw royalty not as gods, but as men. The prince's jaw tightened. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. Pride battled fear within him, for he realized what the others had not. This trial was real. The humans would not yield. They would carry it to its end no matter the storm it summoned, and so the court of humanity began. Witnesses would be called, testimonies would be heard, the galaxy would see with its own eyes not only the crimes of a prince, but the measure of humanity itself. As the opening day closed, the chamber emptied slowly. Voices hushed. Outside, fleets circled still, their weapons silent but trembling. And across countless worlds, beings of every kind gathered around flickering transmissions, watching history carve its first lines into stone. For the first time, justice had no crown. And for the first time, the galaxy began to wonder, could it endure such a fire? The tribunal did not begin with speeches of grandeur. It began with voices that had long been silenced. The first witness was not a noble, nor a general, nor anyone clad in ceremonial silk. She was a farmer. Her hands trembled as she took her place before the court, but her voice, though quiet, carried further than the jeweled proclamations of 100 rulers. She spoke of her homeworld, Verdane, a green world of orchards and wide rivers, seized under the decree of the empire. Her husband had been conscripted into war, her children taken to labor camps, When she returned home after the soldiers left, she found only ash. Her eyes met the prince's. He did not flinch, but something in his jaw tightened. The farmer's words were simple, stripped of poetry, yet they struck harder than any orator's flourish. The second witness was a miner from the ice moon Joras. He spoke of tunnels collapsed deliberately by imperial overseers, burying hundreds, alive to enforce obedience. His body still bore the scars, his breath still rasped with dust that had never left his lungs. He told the chamber not of politics, but of screams that echoed in the dark for days, unanswered. Then came a child. Barely, grown, her frame thin, her eyes too old for her years. She spoke softly of a village razed when the empire demanded tribute her people could not pay. She had lived because she hid beneath the bodies of her family. She had been carried away in chains, and for years her name had been stripped from her, replaced with a number. Humanity had freed her when they shattered the camps. When she finished, there was no sound in the chamber, not even from the nobles who had arrived in outrage, prepared to shout at every human word. One by one, the witnesses came. Soldiers who had fought under the empire's banners, conscripts who had thrown down their arms when humanity offered them freedom, merchants crushed beneath tariffs that fed only royal coffers, mothers who spoke of sons carried to wars they never returned from. Each voice was different, yet they wove together a single truth. The empire's greatness had been built not upon glory but upon bones, and through it all the prince sat chained in the dock. At first he sneered, his pride his armor. He told himself these were lies, distortions, exaggerations spun by the enemies of his house. But as the testimonies piled upon one another, as the scars and tears became undeniable, something flickered behind his eyes. Not guilt, not yet, but recognition. The nobles in the chamber squirmed. Some tried to protest, demanding that such testimony was beneath the dignity of judgment, but the tribunal gave them no ear. Here, the dignity of crowns mattered less than the dignity of the broken. Captain Alara Vey watched it all with the stillness of stone. She did not rise, did not interject. Her presence was enough. She had brought these voices to the chamber, and their words were sharper than any blade she could wield. Beyond the tribunal, across countless worlds, the testimonies spread. Transmission beams carried them into homes and taverns, into barracks and temples. In places where crowns had weighed heavy for centuries, people listened with wide eyes. Some wept openly, others clenched their fists. And a question, dangerous, as fire began to burn on their tongues. If a prince can be judged, why not those who sit upon our thrones? The Lutheran Empire tried to block the broadcasts. Priests thundered sermons declaring the witnesses liars, tools of human propaganda. Yet the stories had already taken root, and roots are harder to kill than flames. The testimonies lasted for days. The chamber became a place of grief, of rage, of truth spoken in voices that had been denied for too long. The walls of stone seemed to drink in the words, as though the very tribunal itself hungered for them. On the final day, an old man was brought forth. He was frail, his back bent, but his eyes burned with a steady flame. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "I was born a subject," he said. "I will die a subject. But today, for the first time, I see a prince as a man. And if he is a man, then he may answer for what men do." The chamber was silent. Even the prince's breath seemed to falter. When the testimonies ended, there was no applause, no spectacle. The witnesses left as they had come, quiet, unadorned. But they left behind something greater than crowns or scepters. They left truth, and truth weighed heavier than gold. The prince sat alone in his chains, and for the first time since his capture, his pride faltered. He looked not at the nobles nor at the envoys, but at the floor beneath his feet. And the galaxy, watching, felt the fire spread. The prince had sat in chains while the witnesses poured their grief into the tribunal, their words heavy as stones. He had sneered at first, then stiffened, then faltered in his silence as the tide of testimony became too vast to deny. But never once had he answered, until now. When the final witness was led away, the chamber stilled. Captain Alara Vey rose and fixed her scarred gaze upon the dock. Her voice carried not as an invitation, but as a command. "Prince Kalen of the Lutharan Empire," she said. "The tribunal will hear your defense." The chains clinked as the prince stood. He moved with the practiced elegance of one raised to rule, his spine unbent despite the iron at his wrists. His eyes swept the chamber, not as a man pleading for mercy, but as a sovereign surveying a hostile court. When he spoke, his voice was clear, resonant, sharpened by centuries of rhetoric drilled into royal blood. "You dare to sit in judgment over me?" he began, his gaze fixed on the humans, though his words were meant for the galaxy watching beyond these walls. "You, a fledgling species who crawled into the stars scarcely a generation ago. You, a people without dynasties, without crowns, without history worthy of song. You put me in chains?" Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some nobles nodded with fervor, seizing upon his defiance as a banner. Others winced, sensing danger in his pride. The prince pressed on, his voice swelling, like a tide. "I am Kalen of House Luthor. My blood has ruled 10,000 worlds since before your kind tamed fire. My ancestors bent galaxies to order, brought civilization from chaos, carried the burden of empire so that lesser species might live beneath its shadow. You call it cruelty. I call it duty. You call it war. I call it empire. Do you think history is written by farmers' tears? No. It is written by kings. And when the dust settles, my blood will still reign, long after your kind has burned itself to ash." His words struck like a drumbeat, echoing across the tribunal. But when he paused, the silence that followed was not submission. It was heavy, cold, unmoved. For the first time, the prince's certainty faltered. He had expected outrage, had expected his words to rouse the nobles, to make them roar in defense of their own crowns. But the chamber remained quiet. The envoys shifted uncomfortably, their faces clouded not with awe but with unease. Because behind his rhetoric, behind the shield of blood and dynasty, the witness's words still lingered. The farmer's ash, the miner's scars, the child's hollow eyes. They had been too vivid, too real. Against them even royal rhetoric cracked. The prince's voice dropped lower, edged with something sharper. Fear disguised as fury. "You sit here and speak of justice," he said, his tone tightening. "But you do not understand. You make a spectacle of me, a prince, and think yourselves righteous. But if a crown can be chained, then what crown is safe? If a king can be judged, then who will rule? Will you let peasants dictate the course of empires? Will you let mobs drag thrones into the dirt? Without us, there is only chaos." The words were meant to frighten, to remind the galaxy of its dependence on crowns. Yet in the silence that followed, they carried a different weight. Not reassurance, not authority, but desperation. The Justicar leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the stone. His voice was calm, but it cut deeper than the prince's thunder. "The tribunal has heard your defense," he said. "It rests not upon innocence, but upon birthright. You say your crimes are justified because your blood is ancient. You say the suffering of millions is duty, not cruelty. Very well. The tribunal will weigh your words." The prince's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout again, to drown the chamber in royal fire. But the silence pressed against him, smothering, unrelenting. For the first time in his life, his voice did not command the room. As the guards led him back to his chains, he cast one last look at the nobles in the gallery. He expected their eyes to burn with loyalty. Instead, many looked away. A few even lowered their heads, unwilling to meet his gaze. He realized, with a jolt colder than iron, that the fire was spreading beyond his control. The galaxy had seen him speak, and what they saw was not a king. What they saw was a man. The tribunal had already shaken the galaxy, but nothing prepared the chamber for her. On the 5th day of judgment, the heavens darkened over Seoul. A fleet unlike any since the wars of conquest emerged from the void, banners of violet flame, hulls etched with centuries of victories, weapons that had silenced empires. The Lutheran armada had come, not with fire but with presence, and at its heart, the imperial barge descended. Vast as a continent, gilded in alloys no human forge could shape, it blotted out the sky as it sank into Earth's orbit. The message was clear: this was not a visit. This was the arrival of sovereignty incarnate. When she entered the tribunal chamber, the Empress did not need chains of iron or words of thunder. She carried her crown as though it were carved from the stars themselves, each step echoing like the toll of an ancient bell. Her face was carved by time and rule, stern, beautiful in the terrible way of glaciers and storms. Her robes shimmered with the sigils of 10,000 worlds, and behind her trailed not guards, not ministers, but silence, the silence of courtiers too afraid to speak, the silence of an empire built upon obedience. The Justicar rose to greet her, but he did not bow. Neither did Captain Alara Vey, whose scarred presence stood like an unmoving wall. Humanity did not bend even before the crown of crowns. The Empress's gaze fell upon the dock where her son sat in chains. For the briefest moment, something pierced her mask. An ache, sharp and private, buried beneath layers of steel. But it vanished as quickly as it came. She turned her gaze upon the tribunal, her voice low and resonant. "You overstep," she said. "No thunder, no shouting." Yet her words rolled through the chamber like a tide. "This spectacle ends now. My son is a prince of the empire. His blood is sacred, his station untouchable. You will release him to me. Today." The nobles in the gallery stirred. Some straightened, emboldened by her presence. Others shifted uneasily, for the Empress's words carried not the certainty of command, but the brittleness of demand. The Justicar did not move. His reply was simple. "Here, Majesty, blood is no shield. He is not a prince. He is the accused." The Empress's eyes narrowed and the air seemed to grow colder. Yet she did not strike, did not unleash the force that hung above the planet like a poised blade. Instead, she stepped forward, her voice rising, sharpened by both fury and grief. "You do not understand what you risk," she said. "For millennia, crowns have kept the stars from tearing themselves apart. We bear the weight so lesser peoples may live. Remove the crown and all you will know is chaos. Humanity toys with fire too great to hold. Release him or burn the galaxy with your arrogance." Her words echoed the prince's, yet when she spoke them, they carried more than arrogance. They carried sorrow. She was not merely a ruler fighting for power. She was a mother fighting for a son. For the first time, Captain Alara spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut clean through the chamber. "And what of the mothers who buried their children because of him? What of the fathers broken under his wars? Do they not bleed as you bleed? Do they not ache as you ache now? Should their grief mean less because their children were not born with crowns?" The Empress turned, her eyes locking onto Alara. For a heartbeat, the mask cracked again. Pain warred with pride. Fury battled with grief. "You dare," she whispered. "You dare speak to me of grief when you sit in judgment over my child?" Alara did not look away. Her scarred face held steady, her voice heavy with the weight of 1,000 silent graves. "Yes, because it was your child who filled the graves." The chamber trembled with silence. Even the nobles could not find words. The galaxy watched, and in that moment, they saw not merely an empress draped in regalia, but a mother staring into a mirror she could not shatter. The Empress did not stay. With a sweep of her robes, she turned from the dock, her composure snapping back into place. She addressed the tribunal with one final decree. "If you proceed, you will not merely judge a prince, you will judge crowns themselves. And when you judge crowns, you invite every throne to rise against you." Her words lingered like smoke. Then she left, her retinue trailing in silence, the chamber still vibrating from the force of her presence. When she was gone, the tribunal exhaled as though a storm had passed, but the storm had not left. It had only stepped outside the door, waiting, and the galaxy held its breath. For the trial had become something greater than judgment of a man. It had become judgment of the very idea of kings. The chamber was emptied. The galleries stood silent, their nobles and envoys dismissed. The witnesses had spoken, the accused had thundered, the Empress herself had departed in fire and warning. Now, only the tribunal remained. Behind sealed doors, of iron and silence, the arbiters of humanity's will sat around a table that seemed too small for the weight it carried. Each was chosen not for rank, but for their clarity of judgment. Jurists, soldiers, philosophers, and one survivor who bore the scars of Ordanis still fresh upon his body. The Justicar presided at the head, his face as unreadable as the stone walls that surrounded them. Before him lay the records of the trial, pages heavy with testimony marked with pain, each word like a wound preserved in ink. No voices were raised at first. The silence was thick, suffocating. Every arbiter knew the magnitude of what they carried. A verdict here would echo not only through courts but through empires. At last one of the jurists spoke, his voice hesitant. Condemnation is justice, yet condemnation is war. If we declare guilt, the crowns will not forgive. Humanity is young. We cannot fight the galaxy entire. A philosopher answered, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. Then what is the worth of justice, if it bends to fear? If we bow to crowns today, then we admit that might is law, and we abandon the principle that binds us together. Our power was never in fleets. It was in our refusal to bend. The soldier leaned forward, scarred, hands clenched. His voice was low, carrying the memory of comrades buried in alien soil. Fear of war does not erase the blood already spilled. I saw Ordanis burn. I saw the prince's banners planted in ash. If we free him, what do we say to the dead? That their killers are immune because their killers wore crowns? The survivor spoke last. His voice was ragged, thin, like wind through a broken gate. I was there. I dug my daughter from the rubble. I held her as the sky burned with the fire of his armies. If this chamber releases him, then you condemn her twice, once to death and once to silence. And silence is the crueler death. The words settled like a blade across the table. No one answered quickly. Outside those sealed doors, the galaxy seethed. Fleets maneuvered, noble houses whispered, rebels on forgotten moons sent messages of hope into the dark. The verdict had not yet been spoken, yet its shadow was already changing the stars. Hours bled into days. Each arbiter wrestled not only with the prince's crimes, but with the peril of justice itself. The Empress's warning rang in their minds. To judge a prince was to judge crowns. To break one throne was to set fire to all. But slowly, inexorably, a shape began to form in the silence. Not consensus, but conviction. Not unanimity, but resolve. They had not been chosen to protect humanity's survival. They had been chosen to uphold humanity's defiance. The Justicar finally broke the silence. His voice was heavy, stripped of all pretense. We were not given this task because it was safe. We were given it because it was right. Our verdict will not decide only this prince. It will decide whether justice itself is possible in the stars. If we shrink, then the crowns are eternal. If we stand, then perhaps their time ends here. The arbiters lowered their heads, some in sorrow, some in grim determination. One by one, they marked their judgment in silence. No cheering, no speeches, no victory. Only the scratch of pens across parchment, each stroke like a tolling bell. When the last mark was made, the Justicar sealed the verdict beneath wax and iron. His hand trembled slightly, not from doubt, but from the knowledge of history's weight upon it. The tribunal would reconvene at dawn. The verdict would be read before the galaxy. And as the arbiters departed into the night, a storm gathered in the silence of Sol. For fleets waited beyond the horizon, empires sharpened their knives, and rebels whispered their prayers. Humanity had made its choice, but the galaxy had not yet answered. Dawn rose over Earth, but the light was pale, trembling, as though the heavens themselves feared what would come. In the tribunal chamber, the galleries were filled to bursting. Nobles in silken finery, emissaries draped in alien metals, rebels who had smuggled themselves in disguise. All had come to see what no star had ever witnessed before. The prince sat in chains. He no longer sneered, though pride still clung to him like armor. His eyes shifted, restless, as though searching for a way to escape not the cell but the weight of judgment itself. Above him, the Justicar rose. The hall fell silent. Every heart, from the marble galleries to the shadowed corners of 1,000 worlds watching by relay, beat as one. "The tribunal has weighed," the Justicar said, his voice echoing like iron struck upon stone. "The testimonies have been heard. The cries of the living and the silence of the dead have been laid before us. We render our verdict not as conquerors, not as slaves to fear, but as keepers of justice." He paused. The silence pressed close, suffocating, immense. "Prince Kalen of the Lutheran Empire, you are guilty of crimes against life, guilty of slaughter, guilty of tyranny. For the lives taken, for the worlds broken, you are guilty." The words crashed through the chamber like a thunderclap. Some gasped aloud, others clenched their fists. The nobles in the galleries paled, their eyes wide with fury or disbelief. Never before had royalty been judged. Never before had bloodlines been treated as mortal flesh. The prince rose to his feet, trembling with rage, chains clattering. "You dare! You spit upon the line of crowns. You condemn not me, but the order of the stars themselves. This verdict is not justice. It is rebellion." But his voice was drowned in the roar of the chamber, not from cheers, not from triumph, but from the uncontainable storm of history breaking open. The nobles shouted, envoys shouted, some in horror, some in exhilaration. Humanity had cast its stone into the still water of eternity, and the ripples could not be stopped. The Justicar raised his hand and silence fell once more. His face was grave, but his eyes carried a fire. "The sentence is not death," he said. "Not yet. We do not kill to prove our power. We judge to prove our defiance." He gestured, and attendants brought forth a simple object, a circlet of scorched metal, once a crown. It had been taken from Ordanis, torn from the dead ruler who had fallen to human guns. The Justicar held it high, the light catching on its ruined edges. "This crown," he declared, "is no longer a symbol of dominion. It is ash. From this day forward, the crowns of tyrants will not rest on the heads of kings. They will be broken, melted, reforged, into shields for the powerless, into tools for the forgotten. This crown will not command. It will protect." The eye. Circlet was placed into the forge that burned at the heart of the tribunal. Before the eyes of the galaxy, the metal softened, sagged, and collapsed. From its ruin, smiths drew a single plate of steel, shaped not as a symbol of rule, but as the first link of a shield to be carried by humanity's guardians. The prince screamed as though part of his soul had been destroyed with the crown. His voice cracked, wild, desperate. "You cannot erase us. Crowns will rise again. You will choke on your own defiance." But his words rang hollow, because for the first time in history a crown had been reduced to ash before the galaxy's eyes. The sentence was sealed. The prince would live, not as a ruler, but as a prisoner. His name would not vanish in martyrdom. It would remain, heavy and hated, a reminder carved into history that even thrones could be weighed and found wanting. Outside the chamber, the galaxy erupted. Some thrones vowed war, their fleets already gathering like thunderheads. Yet in the shadows, in the hovels of the broken and the forgotten, whispers rose like sparks on the wind. Whispers that crowns could fall, that justice could be dared, that humanity had lit a flame no empire could quench. And in that moment, beneath the pale dawn of Sul, the world felt both smaller and greater. Smaller, because the wrath of empires now pressed upon it. Greater, because humanity had carved a place for itself not as subjects of crowns but as judges of them. The prince was led away, his chains dragging across the stone floor. The nobles departed in fury, the rebels in wonder, the galaxy in uproar, and the crown of ashes lay cooling. In the forge, a broken circle reborn as a shield, the verdict had been spoken. The stars would never be the same. The verdict had been spoken. and like a stone cast into still waters, its shock waves raced outward, not in silence, not in slow ripples, but in storms and shattering tides. Across the galaxy, the ancient order convulsed. On the jewel worlds of the Lutheran Empire, nobles shrieked in outrage. They called their banners, summoned their fleets, and poured venom into their declarations. To them, humanity's verdict was an abomination. To try a prince was to try every crown. To declare one guilty was to threaten the very foundation of their dominion. But beyond the palaces, in the tenements where miners coughed blood from poisoned air, in the villages scarred by endless levees, in the silent cities where the dead had been offered as tribute to royal wars, something else stirred. A fire long smothered began to glow. Whispers spread in the shadow of spires. They judged a prince. They broke his crown. The thrones can fall. At first it was words. Then it became defiance. Shackles broken in minds. Soldiers refusing orders. Flags of rebellion painted in soot upon palace walls. Across forgotten moons and border colonies, people raised their heads and spoke aloud what had been forbidden for millennia. The crowns trembled. The Empress of Luther, mother to the condemned prince, sat upon her throne in silence. Around her, courtiers raged and generals clamored for war. Yet she did not speak. Her gaze lingered on the empty seat at her side, where once her son had stood with arrogant fire. She had come to earth to save him, and she had failed. Now his chains weighed not only upon him, but upon her empire entire. For the first time in centuries, she saw cracks forming in the edifice of her dominion. Not from invaders, not from fleets, but from the very people whose obedience had built her throne. Humanity had not only judged her son, they had given her subjects a vision of a world without crowns. The Empress clenched her hands upon the arms of her throne until her nails drew blood. In the shadows, she whispered to herself, unheard by the courtiers. They have lit a fire I cannot extinguish. Beyond her empire, the effect was the same. Rival thrones, once complacent, found their subjects restless. Whispers of Ordanus, of the trial, of the crown melted into ash spread like wildfire through the stars. One emperor ordered the execution of rebels on a distant moon. But when the soldiers raised their rifles, half turned them against their masters. Instead, another queen decreed that even the mention of humanity's verdict was treason. Yet within a year, her own courtiers whispered those forbidden words in secret halls, fearing her crown more than loving it. The verdict had not only judged a prince, it had judged the idea of royalty itself. And the galaxy, long used to bowing, its head was beginning to lift it. On Earth, humanity prepared for war. Fleets were recalled, factories thundered, recruits drilled in the shadow of orbital forges. Yet among the leaders of Sol, there was no triumph. They had not sought this fire. They had only sought justice, but justice, once spoken, cannot be contained. The Justicar stood alone in the tribunal chamber one night, staring at the forge where the crown of Ordanus had been melted. His hands rested on the stone as though listening for the echoes of history. He knew what was coming. The verdict had been the spark, but the fire belonged to the galaxy now. And yet, he did not regret. Because in the silence of that chamber, he remembered the faces of witnesses, the scarred soldier, the grieving father, the trembling child who had survived when so many had not. Their voices had not been silenced. Their truth had been spoken. And for that truth, fleets would burn, crowns would fall, empires would shake. It was the price of defiance. And so the galaxy burned. In the months that followed, rebellions flared like constellations of fire. Empires once thought eternal bled from 1,000 wounds. Humanity's fleets fought not only against invading nobles, but alongside insurgents who now called them allies. Strange banners flew side by side with the Star of Sol. The Empress moved her fleets with fury, striking down rebels and humans alike. Yet each victory bred 10 more uprisings. For every world crushed, another rose. For every crown polished, another melted in secret forges into shields and blades. The fire spread, unstoppable, consuming all in its path. And above it all, the memory of that moment endured. The prince in chains, the verdict spoken, the crown turned to ash. The galaxy had witnessed justice dared, and nothing, not fleets nor empires, could make it unseen. The fires did not burn forever. Even the fiercest rebellion, even the longest war, must one day fall silent. Years passed. Decades. The stars themselves seemed to turn slower in their courses as the galaxy reshaped itself. Thrones crumbled, some by force, some by surrender, some by the quiet erosion of loyalty as subjects turned their backs. The crowns of old were not toppled all at once, but piece by piece, world by world, until the empires that had spanned millennia stood as pale shadows of their former might. And at the center of it all remained the trial. Historians called it a spark, but those who lived through it knew better. It was not a spark, but a reckoning, a wound torn open across the galaxy's memory, through which truth poured. Humanity had not toppled the thrones by conquest alone. They had done so by daring to ask a question no empire had ever dared. What if a king is guilty? What if a crown is not beyond judgment? The prince himself remained in his cell. Age came for him, as it comes for all. The fire in his eyes dimmed, arrogance collapsed into bitterness, and in the end he sat alone in silence. A relic of a world that no longer existed, his name became a curse among the oppressed, a warning among the powerful. When he finally died, no crown was laid upon his coffin. The earth of his grave was unmarked, lost among 1,000 forgotten stones. But the crown he once wore, the circlet, burned into ash and reforged in the forge of earth, endured. Not as gold, not as jeweled metal, but as iron and steel. From it had been fashioned a shield, then another, until 1,000 soldiers bore the legacy of that trial upon their arms. Shields that did not symbolize dominion but defense, shields raised not for kings but for people. The galaxy remembered. On distant worlds, storytellers spoke of that day in the tribunal. They told of the Justicar's voice, iron and unyielding, of the crown melted in flame, of a people who dared to stand where none had stood before. Children whispered of it in darkened rooms, rebels shouted it from barricades, and even nobles, those few who survived the fall of their lines, could not escape its shadow. And humanity? Humanity endured. They bore the scars of war, the loss of sons and daughters, the endless strain of fleets and factories. Yet they endured not as subjects, but as sovereigns of their own destiny. They had written themselves into the story of the stars not with conquest, but with judgment. Not by wearing crowns, but by breaking them. In time, peace returned, not the peace of submission, but the peace of change. Worlds once bound by chains rose free. Councils replaced courts, assemblies replaced thrones. Not everywhere, not perfectly. Tyranny is a weed that never fully dies. But the soil of the galaxy had been changed forever, and always at the heart of that change lay the crown of ashes. Generations later, on Earth, a child stood before the relic that remained. Not a glittering diadem in a museum, but a single battered shield scarred by time and war hung upon the wall of a hall of remembrance. The child asked their teacher why the shield was revered. The teacher smiled softly and spoke the truth. Because, once long ago, the galaxy believed that crowns were eternal, that thrones were divine, that rulers could do no wrong. And humanity, small and fragile though it was, stood before the stars and said, "No, even a king can be judged." The child gazed at the shield, and in its battered surface they saw not power, but courage. Thus the story lived on. Not of conquest, not of empires, but of a crown turned to ashes, and of a people who dared to place justice above all. And so the galaxy changed, not because humanity was strong, not because they were feared, but because they remembered that even the greatest among them must answer for their deeds. This was their legacy. This was their fire. This was their crown of ashes.